Today we're going to take a look at our GUI or graphics user interface and set up some type of start for the game so they're not just jumping right into the level and they have some type of intro, and then we can set up a time. That's how I'm going to set up my game. It's all time based and they're trying to get the highest score possible. So beat it in the quickest amount of time so the time is high. And then eventually we'll code it so they run into the collectibles and they can add points to the time or add seconds to the time. All right, so to start off with, we're going to go ahead and create an empty, and we'll go ahead and zero that out, reset its position. And you can call this what you will. I'm going to go ahead and call it Game Manager. This is going to be an object that persists throughout all the levels in the main menu, and it's going to hold any high scores and all the data we need for our game. Let's go ahead and create a script. We're going to do quite a bit of coding in this tutorial, so I'm going to go ahead and post the code in Google Classroom for you guys, so you could go ahead and take a look at the script and even just copy and paste. And I'm still going to talk about the code so you guys can get an idea of what it's going to do and what each line of code does, but you can at least get it typed in quick. So I'm going to go ahead and call it Game Manager Controller. So once you create that script, give it a second for it to compile, make sure it's all good, and then go ahead and attach it to the game object. All right, now we can get our GUI set up, or user interface. So up in the hierarchy panel, let's go ahead and go to Create, UI, and a canvas. So it's going to look weird at first, but you're going to get this little white outline of a box, which represents the screen coordinates for our game view. So you're not going to be able to see much, and it's not going to affect the editor here in the scene view. Looks kind of funny, but it's going to look right in the game view. So right now in the game view, you're not really seeing anything because there's nothing on the canvas yet. Let's go ahead and set the canvas name to overlay, and let's go ahead and child that to the game manager object. You have a event system object that automatically appeared to represent how the canvas works. Go ahead and leave that object alone. You're still going to need it in the game, so don't delete that. All right, for our overlay, which is our new canvas that we just made, let's go ahead back into Create, UI, and let's go ahead and create an image. So right now it's just going to be a solid white image for now because that represents the color. If we look in the game view, okay, it doesn't look quite right. We have to set the width and the height to make that look right. So if I zoom out a little bit in the editor, just using the mouse wheel and a combination of the mouse move right here, this is our screen. I'm actually backwards. There we go. So this is what our screen looks like. That's why we have a little white square in the bottom left-hand corner. What I need to do is expand this so it covers this right here, which represents the camera and the game view. So I'm going to go ahead and select my image, and over with the width and the height, I'm just going to click and drag over the word width, and you can move your mouse left and right. Make it big enough so that it covers the entire screen. So I'm going to increase the width and the height. And for my X position, I'm just going to move it over. To be honest, we should be able to zero this out. So if I make both the X and the Y zeros, perfect. There we go. So for me, it looked like a width of 1200 and a height of 800 did the job great. All right, so if we go in the game view, looks like a blizzard. All right, so let's go ahead and change this color. For me, when the game starts, I want it to be semi-transparent. So I'm going to click on the color, and I'm going to change the alpha so you can see through it slightly. All right, just to test out what this is going to look like, if I do a play test right now, in the beginning of the game, the player is going to be able to move the camera around, but not the actual ball. Okay, so right now we can move just because we haven't restricted the movement at all. But at first, I want the player to be able to look around until they can actually move. So that's why I'm making it semi-transparent. All right, we want some text to pop on there to tell them what the heck's going on. So under the hierarchy panel, let's go to Create, UI, Text. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this main text. And I forgot to do that with the image, so let's go back and rename this background. All right, on the main text, we have some properties over here. We can change what the text actually says. So I'm going to, for right now, just tell it to say, get ready. And I'm going to align the text for the center in both horizontal and vertical. And I'm going to increase the size. So my font size, I'm going to change to 80. Now, don't forget, right now it's going to disappear, but that's because the width and the height of the text object is not big enough to fit the size of the text. So I'm going to change my width to 600 and my height to 200. Don't worry about oversizing the width and the height. We've already set it to align center horizontally and vertically, so it's automatically going to be in the center of the screen. All right, so at this point in time, go ahead and copy and paste the code over from Google Classroom, or you can follow through in the video and type it out. It's up to you. So I'm going to go through and talk about the code now. So go ahead and open up your Game Manager controller script. Okay, so this is what my code looks like to begin with, and we might need to do some edits later. What I have here are 4 private variables just to hold references to different objects. So in order to use the text type of object, we have to include this library up here. Basically, this allows us to include different types of objects and classes that can be used in Unity. So by adding in this library here, this is all pre-coded classes and libraries and objects that we can use inside of our own scripts. So this is just a reference to our main text object, which is assigned right here. And this is a reference to our overlay game object. This is a reference to our player object, and then this is a reference to the player controller script on the player. We use these very frequently, so creating references to them requires less overhead on the computers and allows the game to run faster. So that's what these 4 assignments are being called in the start. As soon as the game starts, they're creating those references. And then it starts what's called a coroutine. A coroutine is used anytime you want the game to wait for a certain event. In order to use this line right here, which allows the game to wait for a certain amount of time, we have to use what's called an enumerator. By starting the coroutine, this is the name of the coroutine that it's supposed to start right in here. So it's called level start. So it's going to call this line right down here, and it's going to run 1 time. So it's going to set the camera movement so it can be true. So there's one edit that we needed to do for this. Notice that it's getting the mouse orbit script from the main camera. So if we go into the mouse orbit script, we do need to make one small change, a couple small changes actually. The last variable in the script, we created a public bool, which represents a true or a false value. That's all it can have, and we're going to call it can move. So it's either going to be true, it can move, or false, it can't move. So the default is false. So that means when the game is started, they're not going to be able to move the mouse around to change the camera view. Inside the late update, which is how the camera moves around, we're only going to allow that if that can move variable is true. So we say if it can move, then do all this stuff. All right, notice the squiggly brackets. So I inserted this on line 25 and put in an extra squiggly brace right here, the curly brace, to match with the if statement. And that's all inside the late update. So it was this line to create the variable, the if statement, and then the squiggly brace. All right, back to the game manager controller. All this is doing is setting that variable to true so they can look around at the beginning of the game. The next statement sets the overlay so that it's going to be active. Okay. So regardless of whether your overlay in the actual editor is displayed or to hide it, you can click the checkbox and get rid of it just so you can do your editing stuff. Notice it turns gray in the hierarchy panel here. Whether that's active or inactive rather, this line will go ahead and set it active so it's ready for the actual game. This goes ahead and sets the text property of the main text. So if we come back in here, here's my main text object. This is the text property. So it's grabbing that and setting the text. So in case it wasn't get ready, it's just making sure that it says the right thing. It's going to wait a second and then start a timer. So 3 seconds, wait another second, call it to 2, so on and so forth. 1, and then lastly go. Wait for a second after go so they can actually read that, and then go ahead and turn off the overlay or turn off the canvas, which allows them to play the game. So eventually it's just going to turn this disabled. All right, and then eventually set it so the player can move the ball. So that's going to be on the player controller script. So we're grabbing the player controller script and setting the can move variable to true. So just like we did with the mouse orbit, we have to do the same thing with our player controller. Again, just 3 lines we had to change. On line 9, I went ahead and added a public bool so we could turn it to true or false if we wanted to in the editor. And to begin with, we set it to false. So it can't move at the beginning of the game. If it is true, in the update function, we just went ahead and surrounded it with if can move on line 16 and then added a closing squiggly brace on line 40. That was it. So now all of our movement for the player only works if the variable is set to true. All right, if you come back into Unity and test it out, you should be able to move the camera around. The countdown starts, and then after go, now we're moving. We can collect our objects and do our thing. All right, in the next tutorial, I'll go ahead and set up a timer and get ourselves to count down and add some points with the collectibles.